because, as Josh said, this was geared primarily toward a major reduction in corporate income tax. The other key component is the so-called 100% bonus depreciation, allowing companies to write off upfront many of the investments they might otherwise make without all of the complex depreciation schedules. The problem there, of course, is that's only good until the year 2022. So you already have a clock ticking for many people making investments in corporations and thinking, well, either we need to do it right away or we might as well forget it. And so that's sort of a key defect of laws like these, in that if you don't have a provision that's consistent over time, it becomes all the more difficult to measure in terms of its impact.
What does the National Taxpayers Union do? What's your stand?
We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan citizen group. We believe in tax reductions across the board, but also spending restraint in all areas of government. We think that the administrability of the tax system is as important as things like rates and distributions. And unfortunately, this law, with the exception of a few of the individual provisions, such as shifting people toward the standard deduction, doesn't do much for simplification. And that's an important question. You know, the National Taxpayer Advocate of the IRS estimates a range of possible compliance costs with our system, a low of about $100 billion all the way up to $800 billion a year, including opportunity costs. You can't ignore that. And to the extent we can simplify, especially in areas like the earned income credit, people are going to gain, middle class and working class.
Well, let's see what our viewers and listeners are thinking about on this tax day with Pete Sepp and Josh Bivens. Let's hear from Gary first in Newport, Kentucky on our Republican line. Thanks for waiting, Gary. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, filed my federal, and it seemed like I got a cut there, a break there, but then I filed my state, which they used to have a cap on, I think it was 42,000, that they had a cap on the taxable rate on pensions, but the state of Kentucky lowered that cap, and I ended up having to pay it back. So I kind of broke even on the whole thing if I ever saw any change at all.
Yeah,
Thanks, fellas.
It's important to consider all levels of government as far as the tax burden is concerned. And of course, one particular issue with this law, as with many others on the federal level, is whether states choose to conform their tax codes with changes that are made at the federal level. Many states do what's called decoupling and will, for example, not have a parallel credit or deduction, especially I've seen this in several states for the 20% small business deduction on the personal side.
Josh Bivens, any thoughts for our caller in Kentucky?
Yeah, I do agree. I think it is important for people to think about sort of the tax system overall in this country, so both federal, state, local. And then even at the federal level, we have different kinds of taxes. We've got the federal income tax, which is what today is all about, but we also have the corporate income tax, the payroll tax. And different parts of that system are different in terms of how progressive they are in their incidence or not. And so I think one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of the 2017 law is it looked at one of the most progressive parts of our tax system, the corporate income tax, and decided that was the thing that needed to be cut. And yet it didn't cut, payroll taxes. It obviously didn't do anything for state and local because that's outside federal jurisdiction. But if you're looking at the whole portfolio of taxes that face American families, this law came and said, we're going to reduce the one that actually is paid disproportionately by the richest households, leaving most of the rest of the tax system relatively unchanged. That's a big problem for me. I think a big burden for a lot of people is other parts of the tax system that we did not do anything on.
Headline in NBC News over the weekend, twice as many companies paying zero taxes under the Trump tax plan. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that's the bill, the law, lowered the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. In its first year, the number of companies paying no taxes went from 30 to 60. Let's hear from Michael in Morris, Illinois. Michael, Independent Line. Welcome.
Hi, I have a comment and a question, if you'd bear with me. I'm on Social Security. And back in the 80s, they passed some law, and I think it was Al Gore that actually pushed it over the top. And they take half of your Social Security and count it toward your income. I'm one of the lucky Americans that has a pension. but I had to pay under this new tax cut law $395 more this year than last. And I'm already tapping into my savings every year just to make ends meet. Now, my question is this. We have been giving these tax cuts to corporations and the fat cats since Reagan's time. It's never worked. It's never trickled down. And I'd like your guys to explain to me why, like crazy people, do we keep going and giving tax breaks to people that aren't going to do anything for this economy except buy our politicians?
Appreciate that, Michael. Pete Sepp, you want to take that one?
Well, I'd start out by saying there is a fair amount of research that indicates that higher taxes certainly have negative impacts on economic growth. Tax Foundation reviewed 26 separate pieces of literature done over 2 decades, 3 decades actually, found all but 3 determined there was a negative correlation between high tax rates and economic prosperity. As for the trickle-down effect, well, there's been research going back and forth on the effects of these laws. A lot depends on how they're designed. For one thing, the across-the-board reductions in the 1960s after John F. Kennedy's death were measured at increasing employment by 0.5 to 0.8%. Revenues actually increased to the federal government after enactment of the law versus before. You can't isolate all of those impacts, but the evidence is mixed.
Do you think that the Trump administration learned anything from the Reagan experience?
Not really. I mean, I'd say a couple things. One, I'm mostly with Michael on this one. I think cutting taxes on sort of the richest households is just not an economic strategy that has really paid off. I would say at least under the Reagan administration, they did some very large, they did very large tax cuts, and then they did some increases as well. I think the part of the Reagan tax legacy that has some bipartisan support is the 1986 tax reform, which really did try to do some simplification and cut down avenues for sort of gaming the tax system. I would say the 2017 law learned nothing from that. I mean, it was passed so hastily and with, I think, maybe 1 hearing in Congress, maybe 0. And I think the changes they made to the corporate side have just left huge loopholes all over the place. You mentioned before, twice as many corporations paying 0 taxes the year before. And that's in year 1. I mean, what we know is sort of corporate accountants learn over time how to get more and more loopholes. And if in the first year you already see this hemorrhaging of revenue, I would say they didn't learn any of the sort of good lessons of the Reagan tax legacy. They only took the bad ones, which is try to deliver benefits to the top.
Let's hear from David in San Francisco, on with Josh Bivens and Pete Sepp. Hi there.
Oh, yeah, morning. I'm calling you from the land of hyperinflation. And we've been so exposed to fraudulent numbers for so many years that we're kind of skeptical about America was founded on taxation with representation, that the people who get taxed get to run their own lives. Now, if the super rich don't want to pay taxes and they're not paying taxes, why do we allow them to run our lives? So it's, this is the structure of this current tax plan designed to screw us. So that's my first question. The second one is, how do currency speculators pay taxes?
We'll let you go there, David. Guys, keep that thought for a second. We'll get one more call here from Thomas in Little Blum, Texas. Good morning, Thomas, on our Republican line.
Hi, it's Little Elm, Texas.
Little Elm, go ahead.
Hi. For those people who are working right now, I would suggest that they go to their human resources or employer of their employer and have a percentage taken out withholding. Say 10%, or if you can afford it, 20%. And that will allow you, one, to have more pay in your check after you figure out you can do that. You can have more pay in your check as it is now with the tax law, the new tax law. And with this withholding at a higher rate, you can also have a nice substantial amount of money coming back at the end of the year. Now, for those people like that gentleman who was on retirement with a pension, that's an earned income additional to your Social Security. However, if he had taken